Jonathan Roumie stood steady as a furious security guard ordered him out of the Chicago Mall, hand gripping his shoulder with surprising force. All around, shoppers froze at the unexpected clash. The man known for portraying Jesus calmly facing removal like a trespasser. Jonathan's cross necklace glinted under the bright skylight, a quiet anchor against the officer's harsh words about making people uncomfortable. The moment seemed unreal, yet Jonathan's steady eyes held no panic, only a question deeper than the guard could see. People whispered, phones half erased to record what might happen next. And in the hush, something far more powerful than a rule violation was waiting to break through. The security guard guided Jonathan firmly down the corridor past a group of stunned bystanders while a mother whispered to her son, "Is that really him?" The boy clutched a fresh pretzel, his eyes wide, recognizing Jonathan from a show his grandmother watched every Sunday. Jonathan glanced around, offering a small, respectful nod to those who looked worried for him. But he didn't resist or raise his voice, choosing to walk with a posture that carried dignity rather than protest. The guard's pace was brisk, and as they turned the corner toward a quieter hallway near the service elevators, the atmosphere seemed to tense even more. Jonathan noticed a janitor pause with his mop, staring as if unsure he should keep working while this strange moment unfolded. There was a quiet sense of something bigger pressing in around the scene, like a question hanging in the air. Jonathan felt a flicker of faith steady him, reminding him to stay present and watch what God might be about to do. The guard stopped abruptly, turning to face Jonathan with a seriousness that felt as heavy as the badge pinned to his shirt. "Look," he snapped. "You're making people uncomfortable, all right, standing around with that crowd praying with strangers. It's not what the mall wants, okay?" Jonathan listened carefully, reading past the frustration in the guard's voice to catch the hint of genuine concern buried underneath. Before Jonathan could reply, the radio at the guard's shoulder crackled, with a request for a code check in another wing of the mall. But the officer kept his eyes locked on Jonathan as if unwilling to leave without answers. Jonathan drew a slow breath, deciding to speak with honesty. "I wasn't disrupting anyone," he said quietly. "I was just listening to people, praying if they asked. That's all." The guard's jaw flexed again, torn between policy and something he couldn't quite name. Jonathan could see the man's confusion as clearly as he saw the store signs reflecting on the polished floor tiles. Somewhere in that confusion, there was a deeper struggle, a spark of something that reminded Jonathan why he'd come here in the first place. The guard shifted uncomfortably, trying to hold on to his stern tone. "You can't just hang around like that," he insisted. "People complain, you know? They think you're, well, I don't know, making them nervous." Jonathan nodded, not dismissing the concern, but also unwilling to agree that a simple prayer could be threatening. The tension between them seemed to thicken, but Jonathan refused to feed it with anger. He kept his posture relaxed, a quiet confidence shining through his calm eyes. And in that pause he offered a simple question that surprised even the guard. "Are you all right?" The guard blinked, startled, as if nobody had ever flipped the script on him before. "What? I'm fine," he snapped, voice pitching just slightly higher. Jonathan held his gaze with a gentle steadiness, not pushing, but not backing down either. "You seem upset," he said, compassion lacing every word. "And I'm sorry if I've added to your stress today." The guard opened his mouth to argue, then shut it again, looking away toward the row of vending machines against the back wall. There was a crack in his composure, and Jonathan saw it, the kind of crack that might let grace slip through if given the chance. Jonathan didn't move any closer, but his patience spoke volumes, leaving a silence that felt almost like an invitation. For a moment, the guard seemed to weigh the cost of letting his guard down. The radio buzzed again on his shoulder, but he ignored it, eyes shifting back to Jonathan's calm, respectful face. "Look," he finally muttered. "I've just had a long day, all right?" Jonathan nodded, acknowledging that weight without judgment. "I understand," he said softly, offering an empathy most people didn't extend to a stranger in uniform. The guard crossed his arms, frustration starting to crumble into something closer to defeat. "People around here get weird about religion," he continued, voice lowering. "They complain even if you're just," he gestured vaguely, unable to finish. Jonathan quietly filled in the gap. "Praying," he said, letting the word rest gently in the air. The guard sighed as if the truth had cost him something to admit. Footsteps echoed through the corridor as another shopper wandered past, eyeing the scene curiously before hurrying away. Jonathan could feel how fragile this moment was, how quickly it could slip back into conflict if he wasn't careful. The guard shifted again, clearly torn. "Look, I'm not trying to be the bad guy," he insisted. "But rules are rules, and if people feel weird, I have to do something about it." Jonathan's expression stayed peaceful, rooted in something far deeper than the anxiety swirling around them. "I respect your job," Jonathan told him, calm and even. "You're protecting people, and that's honorable." The guard blinked, surprised by the word honorable. Nobody had called him that in a long time. It was enough to make him pause, and Jonathan seized the chance to build a bridge. "What's your name?" Jonathan asked, voice kind but direct. The guard hesitated, suspicious of the question. "Why?" he shot back, crossing his arms even tighter. "Because," Jonathan answered gently, "I'd like to know who's protecting this place." The guard looked down for a second, almost shy under the sudden respect. "It's Mike," he finally offered. Jonathan nodded. "Mike," he repeated, letting the name settle with genuine warmth. "Thanks for making sure everyone is safe." Mike shifted awkwardly, thrown off balance by the unexpected gratitude. The simple act of being acknowledged seemed to soften something in him. Mike let out a long breath, shoulders relaxing a fraction as the weight of the moment settled between them. "Okay," he muttered. "I don't want to kick you out, but you can't just." He paused, searching for the right words. "Stand around talking about God. People complain, and then corporate gets on me." Jonathan understood. There was a chain of command even in a mall. Rules designed to keep business flowing smoothly. But he also knew some rules were meant to be questioned gently, but firmly when they smothered hope. "What if I'm invited to talk?" Jonathan asked, lifting a brow in quiet challenge. "If someone approaches me, is that all right?" Mike looked unsure, scratching his head. I don't know," he admitted. "I'll have to check." Jonathan nodded, not pressing the issue further. "That's fair," he said. "I'll wait." The patience in his tone seemed to catch Mike off guard again, as if this man in black had all the time in the world to let things play out. Mike's radio squawked once more, a voice calling him to deal with a group of kids skateboarding in the parking garage. Mike glanced at Jonathan, torn between duty and curiosity. "You stay right here," he ordered, though the edge in his voice had eased. Jonathan nodded, perfectly willing to cooperate. "And if you believe in showing courage, even when you're misunderstood, comment the word courage below to stand with Jonathan's example." Mike walked away, leaving Jonathan alone by the service corridor, a hush settling around him. The mall felt bigger somehow, like a cathedral of second chances waiting to be noticed. As Jonathan stood there, a young woman approached him cautiously, clutching a shopping bag against her chest. "Excuse me," she said, voice quivering. "Are you really, the guy from that show?" Jonathan offered a gentle smile, nodding. "Yes, that's me," he replied softly. She looked down at the floor, suddenly self-conscious, then glanced back up with tears threatening to spill. "I know this is weird," she whispered, "but would you pray for me?" Jonathan didn't hesitate, though he checked the hallway for Mike first. "Of course," he answered. The woman let out a breath, relief washing over her features like morning sunlight. Breaking through clouds, they stepped to the side, away from the heavy flow of shoppers near a vending machine humming quietly. Jonathan lowered his voice, inviting her to share whatever was on her heart. "I just lost my job," she confessed, tears spilling over now. "And I don't know how I'm going to take care of my mom." Jonathan nodded, listening deeply, holding her words as something precious. "You're not alone," he told her, letting the words land with steady grace. "God sees you." The woman swallowed hard, trembling, as if hope was something she'd almost forgotten how to hold. Jonathan prayed softly, words wrapped in gentle reverence. And for a moment, the mall felt like holy ground. The prayer finished. The woman wiped her cheeks, eyes shining with a new kind of strength. "Thank you," she said, voice steadier now. "I don't know what I was expecting, but thank you." Jonathan smiled, giving a small nod of encouragement. "Sometimes," he replied, "you just need a reminder you're loved." She nodded, clutching her shopping bag tighter, and stepped back into the river of shoppers, carrying something lighter than when she'd arrived. "You just need a reminder you're loved." She nodded, clutching her shopping bag tighter, and stepped back into the river of shoppers, carrying something lighter than when she'd arrived. Jonathan took a deep breath, letting the echoes of their quiet moment settle, All around him, the noise of commerce resumed, oblivious to the small miracle that had just taken place. Jonathan felt a calm certainty that he'd been meant to stand here today. A few moments later, Mike returned, looking slightly frazzled from chasing kids off the railings. He spotted Jonathan still waiting patiently where he'd left him, which seemed to surprise him. "You're still here," Mike said, almost incredulous. Jonathan offered a small grin. "You told me to stay," he answered simply. Mike shook his head, a reluctant respect creeping back in. "Most people would have bailed," he muttered. Jonathan shrugged, the small cross on his necklace catching the fluorescent light. "I'm not most people," he replied gently. The words laced with quiet humor. Mike let out a half laugh, almost despite himself. Mike seemed to soften once more, folding his arms, but with less tension this time. "Look," he sighed. "I asked my supervisor. Technically, you can talk with people if they approach you first, but you can't go around stopping shoppers." Jonathan nodded, perfectly content with that compromise. "That sounds fair," he agreed, gratitude in his voice. Mike looked at him closely, as if seeing past the black shirt, and crossed to the man underneath. "Why do you even do this?" he asked, genuinely curious. Jonathan paused, letting the question breathe. "Because people are hurting," he answered simply, "and I believe God meets them right where they are." The words hung between them, resonant and unforced. Mike stood quiet for a second, clearly wrestling with the simple honesty of Jonathan's answer. Something in those words seemed to land deeper than any corporate policy ever could. "Yeah," Mike finally admitted, "people are hurting." His shoulders dropped, and for the first time since their conversation began, he seemed more human than uniform. Jonathan felt a small nudge in his heart, sensing that this was no random interruption. Maybe it was an appointment he hadn't planned for, but one God had seen coming. "You doing all right, Mike?" Jonathan asked, voice soft. The guard looked away, swallowing hard. "Honestly," he said, "no, but that's not your problem." Jonathan shook his head gently. "If you're carrying a burden," he replied, "I'm willing to listen." Mike looked up, startled by the offer, his eyes suspicious and vulnerable all at once. The traffic of the shoppers continued behind them, but the world seemed to slow down, like the mall had turned into its own quiet sanctuary. Mike rubbed his temple, trying to push back frustration and exhaustion that had built up all day. "It's personal," he warned. Jonathan nodded. "That's all right," he assured him. "You don't have to share, but you don't have to hold it alone either." The invitation hovered, a quiet promise that he was safe in this conversation. Mike sighed heavily, glancing around before leaning in a bit closer. "My brother," he began, voice barely above a whisper. "He's in the hospital. They don't know what's wrong yet." Jonathan listened closely, honoring the weight behind every word. "That's hard," he said, steady and compassionate, "really hard." Mike nodded, wiping at the corner of one eye before the tear could escape. "He's my little brother, man," he choked out. "I'm supposed to protect him." Jonathan's heart ached in recognition, the quiet burden of family, and the desire to keep those we love safe. He nodded slowly, holding space for Mike's pain. For a moment, neither of them spoke, letting the quiet say what words could not. Then Jonathan gently broke the silence. "Do you want to pray for him?" he asked, not pushing, just offering. Mike looked startled again, then let out a nervous laugh. "Me? Pray?" Jonathan smiled kindly. "I'll lead," he offered, "if you'd like." Mike took a shaky breath, weighing whether it was worth risking a moment of vulnerability in the middle of a shopping mall. Finally, he gave a short nod, almost embarrassed. "Okay," he agreed, voice low. Jonathan bowed his head slightly, and Mike followed suit, to men grounded by something bigger than their fear. Jonathan prayed softly, words simple, but filled with sincere hope. He asked for peace for Mike's brother, for wisdom for the doctors, for courage and rest for Mike himself. The prayer wasn't fancy or long, just honest, the kind of conversation that felt as real as the worn tile beneath their feet. Mike listened, breathing more evenly as Jonathan spoke. By the time Jonathan finished, Mike's shoulders had dropped even more, as if he'd set down a heavy backpack. "Thanks," Mike said, voice cracking. Jonathan looked at him with a gentle steadiness. "You don't have to carry all of it alone," he reminded him. Mike stood there for a second, unsure of what to do with the relief pouring through his chest. I didn't expect that," he admitted, eyes shining with gratitude. Jonathan smiled, calm and sincere. "Sometimes the best moments aren't planned," he replied. Mike nodded, still blinking back emotion, and shifted awkwardly, as if trying to reassemble his professional mask. But something in his posture had changed. A little less rigid, a little more human. Jonathan felt a soft peace settle around them, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. People walked past, oblivious to the quiet breakthrough happening near the service corridor. Jonathan offered another gentle nod, patient and kind. "I still have to ask you to leave," Mike finally said, though the bite had left his voice. Jonathan accepted it with a calm grace that disarmed the moment. "I understand," he replied. "I don't want to cause trouble." Mike shook his head. "You're not trouble," he corrected, surprising himself, "but corporate wants complaints handled." Jonathan nodded again, respecting the guard's position without argument. "I get it," he repeated softly. Mike took a deep breath, still struggling with the rules against the pull of his heart. "Maybe," he hesitated, "maybe you could come back sometime. But with permission." Jonathan smiled, bright and hopeful. "I'd like that," he agreed. The mall's intercom crackled overhead, announcing a lost child waiting at guest services, breaking their moment of stillness. Mike's radio buzzed again, drawing him back to his duties. "I have to go," he told Jonathan, regret woven through his tone. Jonathan stepped back, giving him space. "Go take care of them," he encouraged. "You're good at that." Mike almost smiled at the compliment, then turned on his heel and jogged down the corridor. Jonathan watched him go, a sense of peace flooding his spirit. The encounter had not gone the way he expected, but somehow it felt exactly right. He could still sense God at work, even in a place built for shopping instead of worship. Jonathan took one last glance around before starting toward the nearest exit. His steps were unhurried, heart calm, trusting that he'd done what was needed. Shoppers moved past him, some still whispering after recognizing his face, others too lost in their errands to notice. He smiled at a mother holding her toddler, and she smiled back as if warmed by a gentle light. As he neared the glass doors, a teenager on a bench gave him a thumbs up, clearly knowing who he was. Jonathan returned the gesture, his kindness so natural it needed no explanation. The late afternoon sun spilled through the entrance, painting golden streaks across the marble floor. He felt grateful for the strange interruption, for Mike's courage, for every chance to plant seeds of hope. Stepping outside, Jonathan breathed in the city air, fresh with a hint of spring, despite the traffic noise. The energy of downtown Chicago pulsed all around him. Taxis honking, people talking, buses rumbling past. Somehow, after the stillness of that prayer with Mike, the city felt more alive than chaotic. He paused for a moment, taking it in with a sense of appreciation. God was present here, too. In every hurried footstep and every worried face, Jonathan glanced up toward the sky, letting the warmth of the sun steady him. "Thank you," he whispered quietly, though nobody was around to hear. It was a moment of worship without walls, honest and free. Just as he was about to leave the plaza outside the mall, Jonathan heard someone call out, "Excuse me." He turned to see a young man rushing toward him, phone in hand, a mixture of awe and hope in his face. "Are you Jonathan?" the guy stammered, breathless. Jonathan offered a kind nod. "Yes," he replied warmly. "I'm Jonathan." The young man looked relieved, as if he'd caught a miracle on the sidewalk. "My mom is sick," he blurted, "and I saw you on that show, and I don't know, I just thought, could you pray for her?" Jonathan's eyes softened, recognizing that sacred opportunity once more. "Of course," he answered without hesitation. They stepped a bit away from the busy entrance, finding a quiet spot near a planter overflowing with bright flowers. The young man took a deep breath, clearly trying to steady himself. "She's been fighting cancer," he explained, voice breaking. "And I don't know how to help her anymore." Jonathan nodded, honoring the honesty in those words. "You're a good son," he told him, simple and true. The young man's shoulders trembled as he held back tears. "I just don't want her to give up," he whispered. Jonathan placed a comforting hand on the man's shoulder, grounding him. "Let's ask for strength," he said softly, inviting the moment to transform worrying into courage. Jonathan's prayer flowed gently, carrying compassion and hope into every word. He asked for healing, for endurance, for love to fill the spaces fear tried to steal. The young man closed his eyes tightly, clinging to every syllable as if they might anchor him in a storm. The sounds of the city kept swirling around them, but it felt like they were wrapped in something holy. Jonathan finished with a peaceful amen, and the young man wiped at his eyes, a new steadiness showing through. "Thank you," he said, voice stronger than before. Jonathan smiled. "Keep loving her," he encouraged. "It matters more than you think," and the young man nodded, truly believing it. As Jonathan turned to leave again, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from a friend asking if he was still at the mall. He smiled, replying that he was headed out now, but delayed in the best way. There was no sense of regret about the time he'd spent there. In fact, it felt like exactly where he was meant to be. Every conversation, every prayer seemed to stitch together a picture of grace unfolding. He felt certain that God used even a security guard's frustration to open doors nobody could have planned. That sense of purpose gave him a steady heart as he moved toward the train station. Jonathan knew he'd be telling this story for a long time. The station bustled with its own energy. People juggling suitcases, announcements echoing through the cavernous hall. Jonathan bought a ticket for the next ride home, grateful for a moment to reflect while waiting on the platform. He found a bench, settling into the quiet in his heart, despite the noisy crowd. Memories of the day moved through him like snapshots. The guard's clenched jaw, the woman's tearful gratitude, the young man's hopeful question. Each was a reminder that faith rarely shows up in perfectly scripted ways. Sometimes it arrives through conflict or even a misunderstanding. And Jonathan felt a powerful peace that everything that happened was exactly as it needed to be. As the train approached with a gentle rumble, Jonathan stood, adjusting the strap of his small leather bag across his shoulder. A group of teenagers nearby recognized him and began whispering. One of them shilly lifting a phone to sneak a photo. Jonathan gave a polite smile, nodding at them with warmth that made them grin in relief. He never resented the attention. In fact, it often opened more conversations than he could have planned on his own. As the doors slid open, he stepped inside and found a seat. Grateful for a chance to rest, the city rolled by through the wide windows, all glass and movement. Jonathan breathed in slow, centering himself again. Somewhere in the passing streets, someone else might be waiting for a word of hope. The rhythmic sway of the train soothed him, giving him space to think about. Mike again. Jonathan wondered if the guard might go home tonight and tell his family about the strange, unexpected prayer by the elevators. There was a power in quiet seeds planted, unseen but alive. The faces from the mall moved through Jonathan's mind. Like a gentle slideshow, the woman who had lost her job, the boy worried for his mom, even the curious onlookers who said nothing but surely carried away questions. Each of them had been drawn into a moment bigger than themselves. Jonathan felt thankful for the courage to say yes to interruptions. That courage, he thought, might just be the simplest way to live a faithful life. The train stopped at another station, new passengers shuffling in with the worn hush of strangers. Jonathan watched an elderly couple settle opposite him, their hands joined like they had known each other forever. He smiled at them quietly, inspired by the tenderness they carried into such an ordinary moment. It reminded him that love doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it is simply showing up day after day for each other. His heart warmed with that lesson, a message as old as faith itself. The rumble of the tracks became a soft backdrop, almost like a hymn. Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment, letting the city's pulse become a prayer. As he opened his eyes again, Jonathan found a woman standing nervously in the aisle, hesitating near his seat. Excuse me, she began, voice unsure. Are you the actor from The Chosen? Jonathan smiled, gesturing for her to sit if she wanted. Yes, he answered kindly. She took the seat beside him, her hands twisting around a folded tissue. I don't want to bother you, she said. Could I ask you something? Jonathan nodded, patient as ever. Of course, he replied. She drew a shaky breath, glancing out the window, then back at him with tears forming. How do you keep believing when everything feels so hard? Jonathan felt the question settle in his spirit, heavier than the train's steel weight on the tracks. That's not a small question, he admitted gently, and I don't have a perfect answer. The woman nodded, bracing herself for disappointment. But Jonathan continued, voice soft and sincere. I think sometimes faith is as simple as taking the next breath, he said, choosing not to give up, even if you don't see how things will turn out. The woman wiped a tear away, listening carefully. And you don't have to do it alone, Jonathan added. God doesn't abandon us in our weakness, that's where He meets us. The woman let out a sigh that sounded like relief. The rumble of the train felt gentler somehow, as if honoring the moment. Thank you, she whispered, still twisting the tissue between her fingers. Jonathan nodded. You're not alone, he reminded her. Simple and true. Sometimes I forget, she admitted, shoulders slumping. We all do, Jonathan replied, a hint of a smile softening his words. That's why we need each other. She chuckled, though tears still lined her eyes, and the sound was hopeful. A new stop approached, the station name echoing over the loudspeaker. She stood steadier than before, and nodded at him in gratitude. Bless you, she said, stepping carefully out into the crowd. Jonathan sat back, letting out a quiet exhale. The day had been filled with interruptions, but they felt holy in their own way. Nothing about his schedule had gone as planned, yet every moment had carried purpose. As the train rolled forward, he wondered how many other people needed a reminder that faith still breathed through the world, even in malls, even on subways. The city's skyline appeared in the distance, the glass towers catching the last rays of afternoon sun. Jonathan felt a peace inside, something stronger than any public platform or TV role. It was the peace of simply being willing to serve wherever he landed. That was enough for him. As the train neared his stop, Jonathan gathered his things, grateful for a day that had tested and strengthened his sense of purpose. He stood up, offering a small nod to the people around him who were lost in their phones or conversations. The doors opened with a familiar hiss, and he stepped onto the platform, a little more certain that even detours held divine possibilities. The warm wind of the city brushed past, carrying the scent of distant food trucks and early summer blossoms. Best restaurants near Jonathan smiled, crossing the street toward the next chapter of his day. If there was one lesson carved into his heart, it was this: God could work through anything, even being removed from a shopping mall. Just as Jonathan reached the end of the station walkway, he heard someone shouting his name, voice carried on the wind. He turned, surprised, and saw Mike jogging toward him, out of uniform now, and clearly off duty. Hey, Mike called, a grin splitting his tired face. Jonathan paused, heart lifting with an unexpected joy. Mike caught his breath, looking a bit awkward, but determined. I wanted to say thanks, he blurted out. Jonathan raised an eyebrow, curious, for what? He asked, genuinely surprised. Mike laughed, shaking his head. For listening, for praying. I haven't felt that in a long time. Jonathan smiled wide, moved by the courage it took for Mike to come after him. You're welcome, he answered warmly. I meant every word, Mike nodded, shifting from foot to foot, clearly wanting to say more. I told my brother about you. He confessed, voice cracking, and he wants to meet you sometime. Jonathan's eyes widened, surprised by how quickly grace could ripple out. I'd be honored, he replied without hesitation. Mike nodded again, breathing easier as if releasing a burden. He's scared, Mike added softly. We all are. Jonathan stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. That's when faith matters most, he said. Mike swallowed hard, letting those words sink in. Yeah, he agreed, voice barely steady. I think you're right. The wind tugged at his sleeve, reminding them both of how quickly the world kept moving. Jonathan watched Mike's face relax a little more, a spark of peace showing through. You're a good brother, Jonathan affirmed, letting the compliment land gently. Mike laughed, a tear sneaking down his cheek. Nobody says that to me, he admitted. Well, Jonathan answered kindly, someone should. They stood there a moment longer, letting the city swirl around them like a living backdrop to their unexpected friendship. The traffic roared by, but neither seemed to notice. I still got to do my job, Mike said, a grin creeping onto his face. But I think next time you come to the mall, we can make it work. Jonathan laughed, the sound genuine and bright. Deal, he replied, reaching out for a quick handshake. Mike took it, squeezing with a surprising gratitude that spoke volumes. Take care of yourself, Jonathan told him, meaning every syllable. Mike nodded. I will, he promised, stepping back with a final wave. Jonathan watched him disappear into the flow of people leaving the station. A sense of joy bloomed in Jonathan's heart, knowing the day's unexpected path had led here. He turned back toward the street, feeling the weight of everything settle into place. God had orchestrated this. Jonathan felt sure of it. Even the awkwardness, even the confrontation, there was a reason he'd met Mike, a reason they'd talked, a reason those prayers had been spoken. Every person who'd crossed his path had needed something, and Jonathan was grateful to have been the one to give it. He stepped lightly down the stairs toward the sidewalk, his cross necklace catching the fading sun. Somewhere behind him, Mike was probably already telling someone about the moment they'd shared. Jonathan felt thankful for the ways God surprises us. As the city lights began to blink on, the streets grew busier, carrying stories and secrets. Of 1,000 strangers, Jonathan moved through them quietly, carrying a peace that could not be bought or sold. Each step reminded him that faith was never confined to church walls or scripted prayers. It was a living, breathing choice made moment by moment to keep showing up. He let the rhythm of the city fold into his heart. One last prayer whispered. For all those he'd met, gratitude washed over him, gentle and complete. He knew he would sleep well tonight. And maybe, just maybe, so would Mike. Jonathan reached a street corner, stopping to watch a group of kids playing catch in a patch of green between buildings. Their laughter rang clear and bright, reminding him of hope that could thrive even in the most unlikely places. He smiled, moved by their simple joy, and kept walking. His mind returned to the faces from the mall, each of them woven into his memory with gentle care. None of those encounters had been scripted or rehearsed, but they were all holy in their own way. Jonathan felt a rush of gratitude for being a witness to such quiet transformations. The city pulsed around him, but peace held him steady. That was a gift worth more than any applause. The sidewalk was crowded with evening commuters rushing home with their stories and their worries. Jonathan stepped aside to let an older couple pass, their hands linked in quiet tenderness. A warm breeze stirred the air, reminding him of God's constant nearness. Even here, amid concrete and neon lights, grace was alive. Jonathan took a breath, steady and sure. He had no illusions that tomorrow would be easier or cleaner or simpler. But that was never the promise anyway. Faith was a light for the next step, not the whole path. And today, that light had shone enough to guide him forward. Jonathan felt his phone buzz again, a friend asking if he was still free later that night. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. There was always another story waiting, another conversation. Another person who might need hope, and he was ready for it. The mall security guard, the shoppers, the people on the train, they had all reminded him why he kept going. Jonathan answered the text with a simple reply, "I'm on my way." Then, he tucked the phone back in his pocket, taking one last look around the neighborhood. He stepped forward at peace with whatever came next, certain that God would meet him there, too. The evening sky deepened into a navy canvas dotted with the first stars, quiet and steady. Jonathan felt a hush in his spirit, the kind that comes when you know you've done exactly what was needed. His day had not gone according to plan, yet it had been perfect in a way only faith could arrange. The people he'd met, the prayers he'd shared, the moments of unexpected grace, each had been a chapter in something far bigger than himself. He carried their stories like precious gifts, and he knew those seeds of hope might bloom far beyond anything he would ever see. That was enough. As he crossed another street, the headlights of passing cars flashed across his face, catching the simple silver cross around his neck. He touched it gently, a small reminder of who he served and why. Jonathan breathed in the city air one more time, letting gratitude expand through his chest. God had been there in every moment. In Mike's worrying, in the young man's tears, in the woman's heartbreak, even in the guard's frustration. Each of them had been invited to remember that love still works in mysterious ways, and Jonathan had been invited, too, to be part of that love. The city seemed to sigh alive with quiet possibility. Looking directly at you now, Jonathan's story leaves one question burning. Where might faith interrupt you today? Could that interruption be your moment to shine grace instead of frustration? Remember, God often shows up through unexpected people and places, even a security guard with a stern face. If you've ever had your own moment of faith in an unexpected place, I'd love for you to share your story in the comments below. And if you want more stories that remind you how powerful love can be, subscribe right now. so you never miss the next chapter. Because you never know, the next chance to change someone's life might be just around your corner.